At first glance, circuses seem magical, but behind the curtain lies a darker reality. The animals that perform under the big top don't belong in cages or on stages. They belong in the wild, and sometimes their frustration boils over. In this video, we're diving into the most brutal moments when wild animals turned on their trainers and exposed the harsh truth behind the circus. Let's dive right into the first story. On November 27, 2016, Alexandria Lion Village in Egypt was buzzing with anticipation. Families, school groups, and locals had gathered to witness one of the park's most popular attractions, the lion taming performance. Among the stars of the show was Islam Shaheen, a man who had spent over a decade commanding the stage with his mastery over some of the most powerful predators on Earth. Islam, at 35 years old, was no stranger to the dangers of his profession. He had worked as a lion tamer for 13 years, a job that demanded precision, courage, and unwavering composure. Born and raised in Egypt, Islam grew up captivated by the world of animals. He started his career as a handler, working behind the scenes to care for the lions and other animals at Lion Village. Over time, he developed a reputation for his ability to work closely with big cats, earning the respect of his colleagues and the admiration of the park's visitors. Islam's performances became the centerpiece of the park's shows. Audiences marveled at the way he commanded the lions, guiding them through daring routines with a simple wooden stick. While some questioned the ethics of his work, others viewed him as a master of his craft, a man who had dedicated his life to creating a spectacle that left crowds in awe. Outside of the ring, Islam was known for his calm demeanor and steady presence. Those who worked with him described him as disciplined and methodical, someone who treated the animals with care while understanding the risks involved. The Lion Village, however, had its share of controversies. Located about an hour and a half from Cairo, the park featured lions, tigers, camels, and other exotic animals. But critics often highlighted the poor living conditions of the animals, many of which were kept in cramped enclosures with little room to move. Some animals showed signs of malnourishment, their thin frames and dull coats hinting at the neglect they faced. Despite these issues, the park remained a popular destination, relying on the thrill of its performances to draw in visitors. On that November evening, the audience filled the arena, their excitement palpable as upbeat music played over the loudspeakers. The performance was set to feature 3 lions, including a newcomer to the pride, a large male recently imported from South Africa. This lion, with its thick, dark mane and muscular frame, was an impressive addition to the show. However, its temperament had proven unpredictable. It had attacked a trainer in the past, but the incident had been dismissed as an anomaly. Park management believed the lion would adapt over time, and it was included in the show despite its history. The performance began smoothly. Islam entered the ring alongside 2 other trainers, each armed with a wooden stick. The lions were guided through their routines, climbing ladders and opening their jaws on command to display their razor-sharp teeth. The audience watched, captivated by the sight of the powerful animals responding to the trainer's instructions. But the new lion stood apart, his behavior more hesitant. It lingered at the edge of the ring, eyes locked on Islam. The trainers continued the performance, unaware of the danger brewing. As Islam directed one of the lions to climb a ladder, the new lion suddenly moved. Its body tensed, its tail flicked, and without warning, he lunged. In a blur of muscle and claws, the lion closed the distance between them, its powerful frame crashing into Islam and bringing him to the ground. The audience erupted into screams as the reality of the attack became clear. The lion's claws tore into Islam's clothing and flesh, its jaws clamping down on his neck. The trainers reacted immediately, striking the lion with their sticks in an attempt to drive it off. But the animal's instincts had taken over and it refused to release its grip. The arena descended into chaos. Parents grabbed their children, rushing them toward the exits. Some spectators fumbled with their phones, recording the horrifying scene, while others simply stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. The lion dragged Islam across the ring, shaking its head violently. Blood stained the concrete floor as the trainers continued their efforts to subdue the animal. After what felt like an eternity, the lion finally released Islam and retreated to the edge of the ring, its jaws dripping with blood. The trainers rushed to Islam's side, carrying his motionless body out of the ring as emergency services were called. Islam was rushed to Andalusian Salam Hospital, where medical staff worked tirelessly to save him. His injuries were extensive: a fractured skull, deep lacerations to his neck and face, broken bones, and internal bleeding. Despite their best efforts, Islam succumbed to his injuries 2 days later. The news of his death sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Following the attack, Lion Village was temporarily closed as authorities launched an investigation. A spokesperson for the park suggested that the lion's aggression was due to mating season, a time when male lions are known to exhibit heightened territorial behavior. However, critics pointed to the conditions at the park, arguing that the stress of captivity and inadequate safety measures were significant contributing factors. The controversy reignited debates about the ethics of using wild animals in entertainment and the risks posed to both trainers and spectators. Photos of Islam emerged in the days after his death, showing him working closely with the lions. In one image, he stood inches from a lion's face, his stick extended as the animal's whiskers brushed against his chin. The images painted a picture of a man deeply committed to his work, yet they also drove home the remembrance of the unpredictability of wild animals, even those raised in captivity. December 17, 2012, at the Moscow State Circus buzzed with anticipation that evening, its historical walls holding the excited chatter of over 2,000 spectators. Families filled the red velvet seats, children clutching cotton candy and pointing at the sawdust-covered ring below. The temperature outside had dropped to 5 degrees, making the warmth of the circus tent even more inviting. None of the audience members could have imagined that they would soon witness a performance that would end in unthinkable tragedy. Viktor Petrov, known throughout Russia as the Bear Whisperer, had spent over 2 decades building his reputation as the country's premier bear trainer. At 45, he commanded respect and admiration in the circus world, having performed with dozens of bears throughout his career. But none had been as impressive as Kaiser, an 800-pound Siberian brown bear that had been his partner for 8 years. Born into a circus dynasty, Viktor had learned the art of bear training from his father, Mikhail Petrov, a Soviet-era performer who had worked with the Moscow State Circus since the 1960s. The Petrov name was synonymous with bear acts, their family having trained over 30 bears across 3 generations. Viktor had started young, cleaning cages at 8, assisting with training at 12, and performing his first solo act at 17. By 2012, Viktor had become infamous for his controversial training methods and absolute refusal to use safety barriers during performances. He often boasted that a true master needed no cage, dismissing concerns from fellow trainers. His show drew massive crowds but also faced mounting criticism from animal welfare activists. Russian animal rights groups had condemned his methods as cruel and dangerous, with some staging protest outside his performances. Even his father had warned him about growing too confident. Kaiser had come into Viktor's life in 2004, born into captivity as part of a breeding program that supplied animals to circuses across Russia. From the beginning, their relationship was different. While most trainers maintained professional distance, Viktor treated Kaiser like a pet, often entering his enclosure alone and even sleeping nearby during training periods. This behavior had earned him criticism from fellow trainers, but Viktor dismissed their concerns with his trademark arrogance. The bear's early years showed promise. Kaiser learned quickly, mastering complex routines that amazed audiences. But there had been warning signs. In 2009, he had suddenly stopped mid-performance, refusing commands for several minutes. In 2011, he had snapped at Victor during a rehearsal, tearing his costume. Each incident was documented but dismissed by Victor as mere personality quirks. The circus atmosphere was electric. Christmas decorations adorned the historic venue, and the smell of popcorn and cotton candy filled the air. Outside, eager patrons gathered despite the bitter cold, their excitement palpable as they lined up for the evening spectacle. Inside, the stage was set for another night of breathtaking performances. But for Victor, this show would be unlike any other. That day, something was different. Backstage, Kaiser was showing signs of agitation, pacing in his holding area and refusing commands during the pre-show check. Two handlers, Dmitry Volkov and Ivan Petrov, Victor's younger cousin, approached with their concerns. Dmitry noted that Kaiser had barely touched his morning meal, suggesting they should cancel the act. Victor dismissed them with a wave of his hand, straightening his crimson performance jacket adorned with gold buttons. To him, the bear was just excited for the performance. What Victor didn't know was that Kaiser had been suffering from an undiagnosed dental abscess, causing him significant pain. The bear's medical checkups had been sporadic at best, another corner cut by a trainer who believed he knew best. The act began as it had hundreds of times before. Victor entered the ring to thunderous applause, his arms raised triumphantly as the spotlight followed his confident stride. The orchestra played a dramatic Russian folk tune, building anticipation for Kaiser's entrance. When the massive bear appeared, standing impressively on his hind legs, he towered over Victor at nearly 8 feet tall. The audience gasped at the sheer size of the creature. The routine started smoothly. Kaiser performed his standard tricks, rolling a large barrel across the ring, dancing on his hind legs, and balancing on a specially reinforced platform. But observant audience members, including retired animal trainer Mikhail Kuznetsov, noticed concerning details. Kaiser's movements were jerky and uncertain. His eyes darted constantly around the ring and his ears remained pinned back, a clear sign of stress that Victor either didn't notice or chose to ignore. Halfway through the performance, during a pause between tricks, Kaiser let out a low growl that wasn't part of the act. The sound echoed through the tent, causing several children in the front row to shrink back in their seats. Victor responded by tapping the bear's nose with his training stick, a move that would prove to be his final mistake. The act was building toward its famous finale, the loving embrace where Kaiser would gently hug Victor before they both took a bow. As Victor approached the bear with arms outstretched, Kaiser rose to his full height. The audience held their breath, expecting the usual heartwarming conclusion. What happened next would haunt witnesses for years to come. Instead of the expected embrace, Kaiser's massive forelimbs slammed into Victor, sending him staggering backward. He barely had time to react before his back hit the wooden barrier at the edge of the ring. A sickening crack echoed through the tent as ribs gave way under the bear's sheer force. Before Victor could recover, Kaiser's powerful jaws clamped onto his shoulder, crushing bone with terrifying ease. Blood seeped through his crimson jacket and onto the bear's thick, tawny fur, darkening it to a deep, glistening red. The audience sat frozen, many unsure if this was part of the act. It became horrifyingly clear it wasn't when Kaiser dragged Victor's struggling form toward the back curtain, leaving a trail of blood across the sawdust. Children screamed, parents covered their eyes, and chaos erupted in the stands. Handlers rushed forward with tranquilizer guns, but in the cramped space behind the curtain, they couldn't get a clear shot. The bear's massive frame blocked their view as he continued to maul Victor. The sound of tearing flesh and breaking bones mixed with Kaiser's deep growls, reverberating throughout the historic circus building in a chilling cacophony of violence. Dmitry Volkov, the senior handler, attempted to distract Kaiser using emergency protocols, banging metal bars and spraying fire extinguishers. But the bear, now fully consumed by primitive instinct, wouldn't release his former trainer. For 28 agonizing minutes, the attack continued while the audience was evacuated and emergency services arrived. In the stands, Victor's father Mikhail watched helplessly as his worst fears materialized. He had warned his son countless times about his reckless approach to safety. Now, those warnings had become a devastating reality. The elderly man collapsed in grief and had to be treated for shock by paramedics. When veterinarians finally managed to sedate Kaiser with multiple tranquilizer darts, Victor's body was barely recognizable. The bear had crushed his rib cage, severed his left arm, and caused catastrophic damage to his head and neck. Emergency responders pronounced him dead at the scene, noting it was one of the most violent animal attacks they had ever witnessed. The investigation that followed revealed disturbing details about Victor's operation. Kaiser's medical records showed no veterinary visits for the past 18 months. Training logs indicated multiple instances of aggressive behavior that had been ignored. Most damning was the discovery that Victor had been skipping Kaiser's meals before performances, believing a hungry bear would be more compliant. The autopsy of Victor's body revealed over 140 distinct wounds, but it was the crushing force of Kaiser's initial embrace that had proven fatal. Forensic experts estimated that the bear had exerted over 1,200 pounds of pressure, collapsing Victor's chest cavity within seconds of the attack. Kaiser's own medical examination conducted after the incident revealed the severe dental abscess that had likely contributed to his aggressive state. The pain would have been excruciating, making the bear particularly volatile during physical contact. Despite calls for rehabilitation, Russian circus authorities deemed Kaiser too dangerous to be kept alive. The bear was euthanized 3 days after the attack. August 20th, 1994 was a humid and restless day. The streets of Honolulu, Hawaii buzzed with activity as tourists moved through the vibrant cityscape, snapping photos of palm trees swaying gently against the blue sky. Inside the Neil Blaisdell Arena, the circus was in full swing. Families settled into their seats anticipating a thrilling performance. Children tugged at their parents, pointing excitedly at the sequined performers preparing in the brightly lit ring. The air carried a smell of popcorn and sawdust, mingling with the soft hum of conversation. All eyes would soon turn to Tyke, the show's star elephant. But what unfolded next would leave the crowd scrambling for safety and the city reeling from chaos. 21-year-old Tyke was no ordinary circus elephant. Born in the wilds of Mozambique, she was separated from her herd as a calf and sold into the entertainment industry. Her early years were a mystery, but by the late 1980s, she had become part of the Hawthorne Corporation, a company infamous for its use of exotic animals in circuses. Over the years, Tyke was trained to perform elaborate routines, but the methods used on her were harsh and relentless. Handlers relied on strict control, often through physical punishment to force obedience. Incidents of unrest had followed Tyke throughout her career. In North Dakota, she had bolted from a circus enclosure and roamed the town before being recaptured. In Pennsylvania, she had charged at trainers during a rehearsal, injuring one. Each event was seen as a fluke, dismissed by her handlers as manageable behavior from an animal under stress. But Tyke's repeated outburst hinted at a deeper turmoil, a resistance to the unnatural life forced upon her. By the time Tyke arrived in Honolulu for the Circus International performance, her agitation was evident to those who knew elephants well. Her ears flapped, her body swayed, and her trunk moved with restless energy, subtle but unmistakable signs of unease. Yet for the crowd filling the seats that afternoon, she was simply the star attraction, her enormous frame draped in colorful fabric, a living spectacle of exotic majesty. Inside her enclosure, Tyke shifted her weight, her massive feet pressing into the ground as her handlers moved purposefully around her. Alan Campbell, her trainer, and Dallas Beckwith, her groomer, prepared her for the routine that had been rehearsed so many times before. Each action appeared practiced, but the elephant's movements, swaying, flapping, circling, hinted at a tension that no amount of preparation could contain, and that Campbell and Beckwith seemed to ignore. When Tyke entered the ring, the audience erupted in applause. Her deliberate, lumbering steps and towering frame commanded attention under the arena's bright lights. Guided by Campbell's cues, she lifted her trunk, turned in slow circles, and crouched gracefully, earning delighted cheers. Yet beneath the seamless routine, the signs of unrest were growing. As the routine progressed, Beckwith moved closer, signaling her next trick. Tyke's movements slowed, her body tensing as her trunk froze mid-motion. In a flash, she lashed out, striking Beckwith with staggering force and sending him sprawling to the ground. A collective gasp echoed through the arena, quickly replaced by screams as Tyke reared up, her massive feet crashing down on his still form. Campbell rushed forward shouting commands, but Tyke turned on him with terrifying speed, her tusks leading the charge. He fell backwards lifeless, as she battered him with her trunk, her immense weight following, leaving the crowd in stunned, panicked silence. Screams echoed across the arena. Parents pulled their children toward the exits, pushing past others in the rush to escape. Tyke moved erratically, smashing props and charging toward the edge of the ring. The performers and staff scrambled for safety, leaving the arena floor empty except for the elephant and the devastation she had caused. Tyke pressed forward, crashing through barriers and forcing her way into the backstage corridors. A loud crash marked her escape into the streets of Honolulu. Outside, she moved quickly, her feet pounding against the pavement. Cars halted as drivers spotted her towering figure. Several vehicles reversed, tires squealing, as she continued her path. By now, police and animal control officers had arrived. They trailed her cautiously, shouting to bystanders to stay back. Officers aimed tranquilizer darts, but to no avail. The darts seemed to have no effect, and she continued moving through intersections and sidewalks. As Tyke turned into a busier area, officers began to fire their handguns. Her movements slowed only briefly before she surged forward again, charging toward the noise and commotion. Police vehicles formed a blockade ahead, and additional shots were fired. The sound of gunfire echoed through the streets, drawing onlookers who watched from behind walls and parked cars. Near a waterfront park, Tyke's pace finally slowed. Her legs buckled as she stumbled forward, collapsing heavily onto the asphalt. Her breathing became shallow before it ceased entirely. The gunfire stopped and the street fell silent except for the murmurs of officers and onlookers gathering at a distance. Tyke's massive body lay motionless, surrounded by a cordon of police vehicles. After receiving a staggering 87 shots from police officers, Tyke's rampage had ended. By the time the scene was secured, dozens of officers and emergency personnel were on site. The aftermath left Campbell dead, Beckwith severely injured, and many bystanders and innocent civilians hurt. The damaged streets bore tire marks, shattered debris, and overturned signs. Tyke's rampage ended there, but her final moments lingered in the stunned expressions of those who witnessed it. Her enormous presence now reduced to an immobile silhouette against the gray asphalt. In the small town of Krasnoyarsk, deep in the heart of Siberia, the Bolshoi traveling circus was the pride of the region. For decades, it had dazzled audiences with death-defying acts and exotic animals. But none were more beloved than Alexei Petrov's bear performances. At 42, Alexei had spent over 20 years working with brown bears, transforming them from wild creatures into crowd-pleasing performers that could dance, ride bicycles, and balance on balls. The star of his show was Mikhail, a massive 8-year-old Siberian brown bear standing nearly 9 feet tall when upright and weighing over 800 pounds. Despite his intimidating size, Mikhail was considered the gentlest of Alexei's 3 performing bears. Children would squeal with delight as the enormous creature delicately balanced on a large red ball, wearing a sequined vest that sparkled under the spotlights. What the adoring crowds didn't see were the changes in Mikhail's behavior during the past month. The bear had become increasingly agitated during rehearsals, refusing commands and showing signs of stress. Several handlers had reported concerns to management, noting how Mikhail would pace in his cage for hours, occasionally swatting at anyone who approached. The circus veterinarian had suggested removing Mikhail from performances temporarily, but with ticket sales at an all-time high and a special performance scheduled for the regional governor, management pressured Alexei to continue. They reminded him that Mikhail had been performing since he was a cub and had never caused serious problems before. On the evening of November 12, 2014, the circus tent pulsed with life, packed with over 800 eager spectators. The air was thick with the mingling scents of sawdust, popcorn, and the faint metallic tang of animal musk. Children fidgeted in their seats, their faces sticky with cotton candy, while parents murmured to one another, occasionally glancing at their watches. A sense of anticipation hung over the crowd, crackling like static electricity. Backstage, Alexei adjusted the cuffs of his signature red coat, smoothing out invisible wrinkles with steady hands. His face bore the practiced ease of a seasoned performer, but beneath the facade, his heart drummed a warning against his ribs. He stole a glance at Mikhail, who stood just beyond the curtain, shifting his weight from paw to paw. The bear's sequined vest glittered under the stage lights, but Alexei noticed something else. The rigid set of his shoulders, the faint twitch in his ear. Then, with a deep breath, Alexei stepped into the spotlight, forcing a confident smile as the crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Mikhail followed, walking upright, his massive paws waving in greeting. The audience cheered, oblivious to the undercurrent of unease, unaware that this performance would be unlike any other. The first part of the routine went perfectly. Mikhail rode a miniature motorcycle around the ring, balancing on his hind legs, and caught rings tossed by Alexei. The crowd was enthralled, completely unaware of the tension building within the enormous predator. As the music swelled for the finale, Alexei gestured toward the large red ball, the signature act that never failed to bring the house down. But this time, something was wrong. Mikhail remained still, his hulking frame casting a long shadow across the ring. His ears twitched, flattening slightly against his massive head. The crowd quieted, a ripple of confusion passing through the front rows as the bear's hesitation stretched a second too long. Alexei's smile stiffened as he tapped his training stick against the ground, the sharp sound echoing through the hushed tent. He urged Mikhail forward with a calm yet firm command, expecting the bear to obey. But instead of compliance, Mikhail's dark eyes flickered toward his trainer, holding something deeper, something ancient and unreadable. His muscles tensed and a barely perceptible shiver ran through his thick fur. Still, the show had to go on. With deliberate slowness, Mikhail climbed onto the ball, his enormous paws pressing into its surface. He wobbled, struggling to find his balance, a sight so uncharacteristic that a nervous chuckle rippled through the audience. But before Alexei could issue another cue, everything unraveled. Mikhail froze, a deep, guttural growl rumbled from his chest, vibrating through the floor. The sequins on his vest caught the light as he hunched his shoulders, claws curling into the sawdust. Every hair on Alexei's arm stood on end. And then, Mikhail moved. The transition from hesitation to violence was instantaneous. One moment, Mikhail was balancing, his massive frame taut with tension. The next, he lunged forward with terrifying speed, abandoning the ball as it rolled away forgotten. The audience barely had time to register the shift before the air split with a sound both sickening and unmistakable. Flesh meeting raw, unrelenting power. Alexei barely had time to react. The bear's paw struck his chest like a battering ram, sending him sprawling backward with a brutal crack. A gasp rippled through the crowd, but before anyone could scream, Mikhail was on him. Pinned beneath 800 pounds of muscle and instinct, Alexei wheezed, his breath forced from his lungs in ragged gasps. The bear's hot breath fanned across his face, thick with the scent of raw meat and sawdust. Alexei raised a trembling hand, mouthing a desperate command, one that had worked countless times before. But there was no recognition in Mikhail's eyes. Then came the bite. The bear's jaws clamped onto Alexei's shoulder, his teeth slicing through fabric, skin, and muscle in a single horrifying motion. A wet, tearing sound filled the tent, followed by a scream, one that didn't belong to the audience but to the man who had spent decades believing he understood the beast before him. Panic erupted in the stands. Parents clutched their children, scrambling for the exits as security hesitated, their tranquilizer guns raised but fingers frozen on the triggers. The circus band had long stopped playing, leaving only the sounds of horror, screams, the frantic scuffling of feet, and Mikhail's deep, guttural growls. By the time the tranquilizer dart finally struck, it was too late. The sawdust beneath Alexei darkened with spreading crimson, pooling around the sequined vest he had so carefully fastened onto his star performer just moments before. Mikhail swayed, his body finally succumbing to the sedative. But the damage was done. The final act of Alexei Petrov's career was not one of triumph, but of tragedy. His life's work undone in the space of a heartbeat, written in blood on the sawdust floor. In the days following the tragedy, investigations revealed a pattern of neglect within the circus. Mikhail and the other bears had been kept in cages barely large enough for them to turn around. Their diet had been restricted to keep them dependent on treats during performances, and there were reports of physical punishment during training sessions. Animal welfare organizations seized upon the incident to call for a ban on wild animals in circuses. The regional government, embarrassed by the tragedy that had occurred during what was supposed to be a showcase event, quickly passed regulations prohibiting bear performances. Mikhail was eventually transferred to a wildlife sanctuary in the Siberian wilderness, where experts worked to rehabilitate him. Though he could never be fully released into the wild after a lifetime in captivity, he would at least live out his days with more space and dignity than he had known in the circus. For the residents of Krasnoyarsk, the memory of that night lingered long after the circus tent was dismantled. Children who had once begged to see the dancing bears now had nightmares about them. The wonder of the circus had been permanently tainted by the reality that wild animals, no matter how well-trained they appear, remain unpredictable forces of nature. Alexei Petrov's death served as a grim reminder that attempting to control these powerful creatures for human entertainment often leads to tragedy. His final performance with Mikhail became a cautionary tale about the dangers of exploiting wild animals and ignoring their natural instincts. A lesson written in blood on the sawdust floor of a circus ring. On October 3, 2003, Las Vegas was alive with the glittering energy that made it the city of endless entertainment. At the Mirage Hotel and Casino, an audience packed into the theater, ready to witness one of the Strip's most famous acts, Siegfried and Roy. Known for their larger-than-life performances featuring illusions and live exotic animals, the duo had become icons in the entertainment world. Their show, a spectacle of magic and wildlife, had drawn millions over its 13-year run. But this night would mark a devastating turn of events. Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn had captivated audiences for decades, combining Siegfried's intricate illusions with Roy's command over some of nature's most majestic creatures. White tigers were the centerpiece of their act, and none was more famous than Manticore, a 400-pound tiger raised in captivity and integrated into their performances from a young age. For years, Manticore had been a symbol of the bond between man and beast, his presence both awe-inspiring and commanding. That night, he took the stage again alongside Roy under the bright spotlight. The theater was electric as the audience erupted into applause, their focus fixed on the lone stage where Roy appeared with Manticore at his side. The tiger moved with the sleek grace of a predator, its pale fur gleaming under the lights. The act began without issue, the pair moving through the well-rehearsed routine as the crowd sat enthralled. Then, in an unscripted moment, Roy lifted his microphone toward Manticore, instructing the tiger to say hello. Instead, the tiger bit onto Roy's sleeve. Roy responded by tapping Manticore on the nose with the microphone, a signal intended to correct the behavior. Manticore released the sleeve but did not retreat. Seconds later, the tiger lunged, knocking Roy to the ground. The audience gasped as the spotlight illuminated the tiger pinning Roy with its massive paws. A hushed confusion swept over the theater, with some unsure whether the unfolding scene was part of the act or a shocking break from the illusion. Manticore's jaws clamped onto Roy's neck, dragging him across the stage. The sound of gasps and cries began to rise from the crowd. Trainers rushed in, spraying fire extinguishers and shouting commands, attempting to break Manticore's grip. Their efforts were met with resistance as the tiger pulled Roy further, its strength overwhelming the attempts to subdue it. Blood pooled on the stage, visible even under the harsh stage lights. Siegfried appeared, shouting commands as the trainers escalated their efforts, using the butt of a fire extinguisher to strike the tiger's head. After what seemed like an eternity, Manticore finally released Roy and retreated. The trainers immediately carried Roy backstage, where he lay motionless. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, working to stop the bleeding as Roy was rushed to University Medical Center. His injuries were severe: a crushed windpipe, a severed jugular vein, and a damaged vertebra. He had lost a massive amount of blood, and his condition was critical. News of the attack spread quickly, sending shockwaves through Las Vegas and beyond. The Mirage Theater, once filled with cheers and applause, was now eerily silent, its audience left stunned. Manticore was quickly secured and returned to his enclosure, but the damage was done. The attack ended not just the night's performance, but the entire run of Siegfried and Roy's iconic show. Surgeons worked tirelessly to save Roy's life. During the procedure, he suffered multiple cardiac arrests, and part of his skull was removed to relieve swelling in his brain. Despite the odds, Roy survived, though the attack left him permanently impaired. He lost much of his motor function, and his ability to speak was severely diminished. The incident ignited a firestorm of controversy. The U.S. Department of Agriculture launched an investigation into the attack, while animal rights groups renewed calls to retire performing animals. Speculation about what caused Manticore's behavior ranged from claims of a stroke suffered by Roy during the performance to allegations of mishandling. Roy himself later stated that Manticore had been attempting to protect him, though this explanation was met with skepticism. Others pointed to the inherent risks of working with wild animals, even those raised in captivity. Manticore remained under the care of Siegfried and Roy until his death in 2014. The duo, though retired from regular performances, made a brief return to the stage in 2009 for a final act, a gesture of closure to their illustrious career. Roy continued to live at the Jungle Palace, surrounded by the animals he had devoted his life to. In 2020, he passed away after battling a severe illness, leaving behind a legacy marked by wonder, risk, and the unbreakable allure of the magic they created. The attack remains one of the most infamous moments in entertainment history. It demonstrated the fine line performers walk when blending illusion with the extreme power of wild animals. For Siegfried and Roy, it was the night their magic faltered, leaving behind a story of triumph, tragedy, and the enduring mystique of the white tiger. On the evening of January 8, 2014, the bright lights of the Las Vegas Strip pale in comparison to the dazzling spectacles that unfold inside its legendary venues. For decades, performers have pushed the boundaries of entertainment, creating shows that blend danger with artistry. But sometimes that delicate balance tips toward disaster. This was the case for Maria Chen, whose revolutionary tiger act would end in a tragedy that changed circus entertainment forever. Born to Chinese immigrants in San Francisco, Maria Chen defied expectations, forging a path that combined her two greatest passions, dance and wild animals. From childhood, she was captivated by dance and wild animals, spending hours watching nature documentaries while practicing ballet. At 18, she earned a scholarship to Juilliard, where she studied dance while secretly taking courses in animal behavior. Her breakthrough came in 2008 at age 27 when the Mirage's talent scout spotted her performing in a contemporary dance show. They were looking for someone to revolutionize their aging circus program. Maria's unique vision, combining classical ballet with big cat performance, caught their attention. Within months, she was training with veteran tiger handlers, learning the intricate art of working with these powerful predators. The Mirage invested millions in the Dance of the Wild, transforming their theater into a state-of-the-art performance venue. Maria's show became the hottest ticket in Las Vegas, grossing over $80 million in its first 3 years. Critics hailed it as a circus reimagined, and her innovative approach to blending art with animal performances caught the attention of major media outlets. Arjun entered Maria's life as a 6-month-old cub. Maria worked alongside veteran trainers learning the intricacies of working with tigers, but it was her unique vision that brought the stunning white Bengal tiger into the spotlight. Together, they performed over 2,000 shows without incident. Their act was so successful that other casinos began developing their own animal dance fusion shows, though no one matched the artistry of Maria and Arjun's performance. Tigers are the largest of all big cats, with male Bengal tigers reaching up to 10 feet in length and weighing over 500 pounds. Their bite force measures an incredible 1,000 pounds per square inch, strong enough to crush bone with ease, while their 4-inch retractable claws can tear through flesh with ease. A single swipe from a tiger's powerful forelimb is capable of breaking a human skull or knocking down prey twice its size. White Bengal tigers like Arjun are an even rarer anomaly, caused by a recessive genetic trait fewer than 200 exist in captivity, and they are almost non-existent in the wild. That January evening, the 8:30 p.m. show began like any other. The 2,800-seat theater was packed, tickets having sold out months in advance. Tourists from around the world and Vegas regulars filled the seats, many returning for their second or third viewing of what had been called the most mesmerizing show on the Strip. Maria moved gracefully onto the stage in her signature red and gold costume, the spotlight following her fluid movements. When Arjun entered, his muscular frame gleamed under the lights. The audience gasped in appreciation. At 520 pounds, the Bengal tiger moved with surprising grace, matching Maria's choreography with practiced precision. For 40 minutes, the show unfolded perfectly. Maria and Arjun moved through their intricate routine. She was performing elegant pirouettes while he stalked in perfect synchronization, their movements telling a story of trust between human and beast. The audience was captivated, their eyes fixed on the stage, unaware of the tragedy that would soon unfold. Then, during their signature ballet sequence, without warning or provocation, everything changed. Arjun, who had just completed a perfect series of choreographed movements, suddenly turned on Maria. In a split second, the illusion of control shattered. The tiger's massive frame launched through the air, slamming into Maria with devastating force. Under the bright lights, in full view of the horrified audience, Arjun's jaws clamped down on Maria's throat and chest. The sound of her bones crushing under his bite echoed through the suddenly silent theater. His powerful claws tore through her costume and flesh, the pristine stage floor quickly becoming slick with blood. The attack was quick, brutal, and completely unexpected. Unlike other documented tiger attacks where there had been warning signs or obvious triggers, this one offered no explanation. One moment they were dancing, the next, Arjun's natural instincts had completely overwhelmed years of training. The emergency response team trained for this exact scenario, but never expecting to use it, reacted instantly. David Martinez, the head of security, led the coordinated effort. The first tranquilizer dart hit Arjun perfectly in his flank, even as he continued his savage attack center stage. A second dart followed 30 seconds later, finally causing the massive tiger to collapse beside Maria's motionless form. The entire attack lasted less than 2 minutes, but the damage was catastrophic. Maria lay in the center of the stage, her once beautiful costume now in shreds and soaked crimson. Emergency medical personnel reached her within moments, their faces grim as they assessed her injuries. The list of trauma was extensive. Arjun's powerful bite had crushed her throat, shattering her trachea. Multiple ribs were broken, with bone fragments piercing her lungs. The tiger's fangs had severed her left carotid artery, leading to massive blood loss. Deep claw wounds crossed her torso, arms, and face, some penetrating to the bone. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her as they rushed her toward Desert Springs Hospital about 4 miles away. In the ambulance, Maria's heart stopped twice. Each time they managed to revive her, but her blood pressure continued dropping despite their efforts. She received multiple units of blood during the 8-minute journey, but it wasn't enough to compensate for what she'd lost. The trauma team was waiting when they arrived, immediately rushing her into emergency surgery. For 3 hours, multiple surgical teams fought to save her life. They repaired what they could, reconnecting blood vessels, removing bone fragments from her lungs, trying to rebuild her crushed throat. But the combination of blood loss, organ damage, and trauma was too severe. At 11:47 p.m., Maria Chen was pronounced dead. The official cause of death was listed as exsanguination, or extreme blood loss, and massive traumatic injuries. The autopsy would later document 47 distinct bite wounds and 112 claw marks across her body. The force of Arjun's initial bite had been so powerful it had nearly severed her head from her shoulders. The news of Maria's death left the entertainment industry in disbelief. The Mirage immediately suspended all shows, drawing a dark curtain over what had been their most successful production in decades. Within days, the $80 million production was permanently canceled. The custom-built stage dismantled and the remaining tigers relocated to sanctuaries. The incident sparked intense debate about the use of exotic animals in entertainment. Circus performers worldwide defended their profession, citing decades of successful shows. However, the horrific nature of the attack painted a devastating picture of how quickly control can be lost. The graphic details of Maria's death became a rallying point for animal rights activists, further fueling the ongoing conversation about the ethics and safety of using wild animals in performance. What made the tragedy particularly impactful was its inexplicable nature. The investigation found nothing unusual in Arjun's behavior before the attack. His medical records were perfect, his training consistent, and his bond with Maria well documented. There had been no changes to his routine, no obvious triggers, no warning signs. The tiger had simply reverted to his natural instincts without warning. The Mirage's insurance company provided a substantial settlement to Maria's family. Her parents, who had initially opposed her career choice, used the funds to support initiatives focused on safety in the performing arts and promoting ethical alternatives to dangerous animal acts. Within months of the incident, several major Las Vegas venues began reevaluating their use of animal acts. One prominent casino discontinued its Big Cat Show, while another announced plans to reduce its reliance on dolphin and tiger performances in the coming years. The discussion sparked widespread debate in the entertainment industry, and by 2018, many casinos had made changes to the way animals were incorporated into their shows, opting for safer and more ethical alternatives. Arjun was retired to a sanctuary soon after the attack, following protests from animal rights groups who argued against euthanasia. A thorough veterinary exam revealed no abnormal health issues or stress-related factors to explain his sudden aggression. This only added to the mystery of the incident. There was no apparent explanation for why a once cooperative tiger had acted with such violence during what seemed like a perfectly orchestrated performance. On a cold, blustery day in January of 1872, the town of Bolton, England stirred with anticipation. Smoke billowed from chimneys, mingled with the overcast sky as townsfolk navigated the cobblestone streets, scarves pulled tightly against the winter chill. Near the town hall, a large canvas tent towered over the square, its vibrant banners promising a thrilling spectacle. Inside, the flickering glow of gas lamps lit the interior of Mander's Menagerie, where 500 spectators had gathered to witness one of the most daring performances of the era, Maserati the Lion Tamer. Thomas McCarthy, known by his stage name Maserati, was the star of the evening. A seasoned performer, he had spent years traveling with menageries, building a reputation as a fearless showman. Dressed in a Roman gladiator-inspired costume, he prepared to face 3 lions in a display of dominance and control. Armed with only a whip and a thin sword, he would command the animals to leap through hoops, sit on pedestals, and follow his every cue. For the audience, the act was a mesmerizing blend of danger and artistry. But for the man in the cage, it was a high-stakes dance with unpredictable predators. The lions, majestic and imposing, were among the menagerie's most prized animals. The largest, a black-maned lion from North Africa, was a particularly striking figure. Its muscular frame and sharp amber eyes exuded raw power, a reminder that no amount of training could fully subdue the wild instincts of such a beast. Life in captivity, coupled with the loud and chaotic atmosphere of the performances, often left the animals tense and unpredictable. As Maserati stepped into the cage, the crowd erupted in cheers. The lions moved cautiously under the gaslight, their paws sinking into the sawdust-covered floor. Cracking his whip, Maserati commanded the first lion to leap through a hoop, earning applause from the audience. The second lion followed, crouching low on a pedestal at his signal. But as he turned to the black-maned lion, it hesitated, a low growl rumbling from the deep within its chest. The sound carried across the tent, drawing a hushed murmur from the spectators. Maserati cracked his whip again, the sharp sound cutting through the heavy air. The lion's growl deepened, and it took a single step forward, its body tense and poised. The audience leaned in, unsure if this was part of the act or something more sinister. Then, in an instant, the lion lunged. Its massive body collided with Maserati, sending him sprawling to the ground. The audience gasped, some believing it was still part of the performance. But as the lion's teeth sank into his shoulder, blood stained the sawdust, and the reality of the situation became horrifyingly clear. The other two lions, spurred by the commotion, joined the attack. Their claws raked across Maserati's chest and arms as they circled their fallen trainer. The tent erupted in chaos. Spectators screamed, some fainting, others rushing toward the exits in a frantic attempt to escape. Handlers dashed to the cage, wielding iron bars in a desperate effort to drive the lions back. The gas lamps flickered as shouts and roars filled the air. For several agonizing minutes, the handlers fought to subdue the lions. They struck at the animals with iron bars, attempting to create enough distance to reach Maserati, who had been dragged deeper into the cage. By the time they managed to pull him out, his body was severely mauled, his costume soaked in blood. He was barely alive, his breathing shallow. Witnesses later claimed he tried to speak, his lips moving faintly, but no words came. He succumbed to his injuries shortly after being carried from the tent. The attack left the crowd in shock, and news of the tragedy quickly spread across England. Newspapers chronicled the grisly details, sparking debates over the ethics of lion taming and the treatment of wild animals in captivity. Victorian society, captivated by the spectacle of such performances, was forced to confront the deadly risks faced by the trainers and the animals alike. The lion responsible for the attack, later dubbed McCarthy's lion, became infamous. After its natural death in 1874, the lion was preserved by the taxidermist Roland Ward and displayed in London, where it drew large crowds of curious onlookers. Maserati was buried in the Roman Catholic section of Tongay Cemetery in Bolton, where a white marble cross was erected in his memory. The inscription commemorates the life and bravery of a man who lived and ultimately died on the edge of human ambition and untamed wilderness. His tragic story remains one of the most infamous accounts in circus history, a chilling reminder of the volatile balance between spectacle and survival. For over 3 decades, Marco Valentini had been the undisputed star of the magnificent Mondial Circus. A legend, a spectacle, a man who seemed to possess an almost mystical bond with the most dangerous big cats in the world. Across America, he was known as the Lion King, commanding 5 full-grown African lions through daring stunts that left audiences breathless. But even kings grow old. At 58, Marco was past his prime, though he refused to acknowledge it. His body bore the marks of a life spent inches from death. His weathered face, deeply lined from years under the harsh circus lights, was framed by a jagged scar that stretched from his left eye to his jaw, a brutal souvenir from an early career mistake. Yet, in the posters, in the flashing cameras, in the eyes of the crowd, he was still Marco Valentini, the unbreakable beast tamer. The times were changing, and so was the world's view of men like him. The golden age of animal acts was fading under a tide of controversy, and yet, wherever the circus traveled, Marco's show remained the centerpiece. And at the heart of it all was Rex. Rex was magnificent, a 550-pound powerhouse. His mane dark as midnight, his amber eyes cold and unreadable. He was the face of the circus, his image plastered across billboards, flyers, and every piece of merchandise the magnificent Mondial could sell. But behind the scenes, the lion that had once been Marco's greatest triumph was turning into his greatest threat. For months now, something had changed. Rex had begun challenging Marco, not in the playful, manageable way young lions sometimes tested authority, but with a slow, simmering defiance. In training sessions, his movements were delayed, his growls deeper, his eyes filled with something Marco had not seen in years. Twice in the past month, handlers had been forced to intervene when Rex refused to back down, his posture rigid, his tail flicking in warning. The circus veterinarian was the first to voice what Marco refused to acknowledge. Rex was showing signs of stress, unpredictable, agitated. She strongly recommended pulling him from the act before something went wrong. Marco dismissed the warning, brushing off the concern with irritation. To him, Rex was just being a lion. He had dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, brushing off the nervous whispers of the younger trainers. They didn't understand. He had spent a lifetime in the ring with beasts that could tear him apart. He knew their language. Rex wasn't dangerous, he just needed to remember who was in charge. Marco dismissed the vet's concerns, confident in his decades of experience. To him, Rex only needed a firmer hand. But even kings can lose their thrones, and the next time Marco stepped into the ring, he would never step out again. On the evening of July 15, 2018, the magnificent Mondial Circus had set up its grand tent in Tampa, Florida. It was the opening night of a 2-week engagement, and the tent was filled to capacity with nearly 2,000 spectators. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn, cotton candy, and the unmistakable musk of the big cats. Marco's act was scheduled as the finale before intermission. As the ringmaster announced the Lion King in his royal court, spotlights swept across the arena to reveal Marco standing proudly in his signature gold-trimmed costume. 5 lions entered the ring through a tunnel, with Rex leading the procession. The first half of the performance unfolded like a well-rehearsed symphony, every movement choreographed to perfection. The lions leaped effortlessly through the rings of fire, their sleek muscles rippling under the blinding stage lights. They balanced on towering pedestals, roared on command, and moved in eerie synchronization, a testament to Marco's legendary control. The crowd was mesmerized, entranced by the display of raw power and calculated risk. When the 4 lions took their designated places on the elevated platforms, framing the ring like statues of ancient gods, the atmosphere was electric. Anticipation crackled in the air. It was time for the grand finale, Marco's most dangerous, most awe-inspiring stunt, the act that had cemented his legacy. The one where he placed his head inside the jaws of Rex. As Marco signaled for the final act, Rex rose to his full height, nearly 10 feet of sheer muscle and untamed power. His mane, thick and wild, framed his face like the crown of a king reclaiming his throne. But something was wrong. His tail flicked, a warning. His ears pressed back, a threat. The powerful muscles beneath his tawny coat tensed like coiled steel. His breathing deeper, slower. The crowd saw none of this, but Marco did. For a fleeting second, a shadow of doubt passed over his face, a brief hesitation, the slightest pause. But he was Marco Valentini, and Marco Valentini did not falter. He lifted his arms in his signature flourish, soaking in the waves of applause. And then, in a move that had been rehearsed hundreds of times before, he turned his back to Rex for just a moment, just long enough to bask in his audience's admiration. That moment was all it took. A deep, guttural snarl cut through the air like a blade. Before the sound even reached the back rows, Rex moved. It was a blur of raw primal instinct, the perfect predator striking with terrifying precision. The lion dropped to all fours in a single fluid motion and lunged. Marco never had a chance. The impact was devastating, the force of 550 pounds slamming into him like a wrecking ball. He was ripped off his feet, sent sprawling face down into the sawdust, the wind knocked from his lungs before he even realized what had happened. The crowd gasped, some still convinced this was part of the act. Then came the sound that silenced the world, a sickening crunch as Rex's massive jaws clamped down on the back of Marco's neck. A few people screamed, others sat frozen in horror, their minds struggling to process what they were witnessing. And then, just like that, the Lion King was no more. Marco's assistants rushed into the ring with fire extinguishers and electric prods, but their intervention only seemed to enrage Rex further. The other 4 lions, sensing the chaos, became agitated and began roaring and pacing on their platforms. As handlers attempted to drive Rex away from Marco, the lion dragged the tamer's limp body toward the center of the ring. With one powerful motion, Rex shook Marco like a rag doll, the sound of breaking bones audible even over the screams of the audience. Parents covered their children's eyes as security personnel evacuated the tent. Emergency responders waited at the perimeter, unable to enter, while Rex stood guard over Marco's body, challenging anyone who approached. It took nearly 20 minutes and multiple tranquilizer darts before Rex finally collapsed, allowing medical personnel to reach Marco. By then, it was far too late. Marco Valentini, the Lion King, had suffered catastrophic injuries to his spine and throat. He was pronounced dead at the scene, his final performance ending in a tragedy before a horrified audience. In the days following the attack, investigations revealed numerous safety violations within the magnificent Mondial Circus. Records showed that Rex had been involved in 3 previous incidents that had been covered up by management. Former employees came forward with stories of mistreatment and dangerous conditions for both animals and performers. Animal welfare organizations used the tragedy to push for legislation banning wild animal acts in circuses. Within months, Florida passed Marco's Law, prohibiting the use of big cats in traveling shows. The remaining lions from Marco's act, including Rex, were transferred to a sanctuary in Tennessee where they would live out their days without performing. The magnificent Mondial Circus never recovered from the incident. Attendance plummeted, and within a year, the once prestigious show closed permanently. The iconic red and gold tent that had housed generations of performers was sold at auction, marking the end of an era. Marco Valentini had spent his life commanding the respect of the world's most dangerous predators, but in the end, it was Rex who delivered the final verdict. A brutal reminder that the king of the jungle will always be more powerful than any self-proclaimed Lion King. On February 2, 2013, the Suarez Brothers Circus set up its grand tent in the small town of Echochoa, Sonora, Mexico. The arrival of the circus was a highlight for the local community, a chance for families to experience the wonder and thrill of live performances under the bright light of the big top. Among the performers that evening was Alexander Crispin Suarez, a 35-year-old animal trainer whose daring acts with Bengal tigers were the centerpiece of the show. Known for his mastery and precision, Alexander's work brought audiences to their feet with every performance. But this night would mark the end of his career in the most devastating way. Alexander came from a family forged in circus tradition. His life had been shaped by the nomadic lifestyle and long days of rigorous practice that define the world of performance art. From a young age, he gravitated toward the animals that were the heart of the circus. Bengal tigers, with their striking orange coats and fierce presence, became his specialty. Over the years, he developed a deep understanding of the tiger's behavior, earning a reputation as a skilled and courageous trainer. His acts emphasized both the tiger's incredible power and the trust built between human and beast, creating a show that left audiences awestruck. The Suarez Brothers Circus was one of the last traditional circuses in Mexico to feature live animals, a practice that had faced increasing scrutiny worldwide. Despite the controversy, the circus remained a beloved institution in Echogoja, and the performances consistently drew large crowds. That February evening, the tent was packed with families, their children's faces lighting up with excitement as the show began. The audience cheered as acrobats, clowns, and other performers took the stage, preparing the scene for Alexander's grand act with the tigers. When Alexander stepped into the ring, he was accompanied by 2 Bengal tigers. The animals moved with controlled elegance, their muscular bodies reflecting the harsh glow of the stage lights. The act began with a well-rehearsed routine. Alexander jogged in circles around the tigers, cueing them to spin on low platforms. The synchronization between the trainer and the animals was mesmerizing, a witness to their countless hours of practice. The audience watched in amazement, their cheers and applause resounding through the tent. But in an instant, the controlled atmosphere disappeared. One of the 450-pound tigers abruptly stopped its spin and turned toward Alexander. Without hesitation, the tiger lunged, knocking him to the ground with its immense weight. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the tiger clamped its powerful jaws around Alexander's legs, dragging him across the ring. The other tiger remained still, its eyes fixed on the commotion as chaos unfolded. Circus staff rushed into the ring, wielding metal stands to try to separate the tiger from Alexander. They struck the tiger repeatedly, but the animal's grip did not loosen. The audience, initially unsure if the attack was part of the act, quickly realized the gravity of the situation. Screams filled the air as parents grabbed their children, fleeing toward the exits. The joy and excitement that had filled the tent just moments earlier gave way to panic and chaos. As the staff continued their efforts, the tiger attacked again, this time sinking its teeth into Alexander's neck. The trainer lay motionless on the sawdust-covered floor, his body battered and bloodied. The once vibrant atmosphere of the circus had turned into a scene of horror, with the audience scrambling to escape and the staff desperately trying to save their colleague. Finally, the tiger released Alexander and was forced back into its enclosure, but the damage had already been done. Alexander was rushed to a nearby hospital in Huatabambo, where medical personnel worked tirelessly to save his life. The injuries were severe. Deep puncture wounds to his neck and legs, massive blood loss, and internal trauma. Despite their best efforts, Alexander succumbed to his injuries shortly after arriving at the hospital. Word of the tragedy traveled quickly, rippling through the local community and beyond. In the days following the attack, authorities launched an investigation into the incident. Inspectors confirmed that the Suarez Brothers Circus held valid permits for its 11 Bengal tigers and other exotic animals. However, the attack reignited debates about the ethics and safety of using wild animals in performances. Critics pointed to the inherent risks of working with such powerful creatures, even under the most controlled circumstances. Animal rights groups called for an end to live animal acts, arguing that these performances endangered both the animals and the humans who worked with them. The Suarez Brothers Circus continued its tour, but the memory of that night cast a shadow over every performance. The tragedy lingered with the Suarez Brothers' name, transforming what was once a source of joy and wonder into a gruesome reminder of the dangers lurking behind the spectacle. The circus community mourned the loss of Alexander, a man who had dedicated his life to the art and to the animals he worked with. It was December 29, 2009, and the winter chill hung heavy over Rome's outskirts. Inside the heated big top of Circo Romano, the smell of popcorn and cotton candy mingled with sawdust as families filled in for the evening performance. The circus industry was experiencing a renaissance in Italy, with revenues exceeding $500 million annually. Traditional family circuses like Circo Romano commanded premium ticket prices, some reaching $150 for front row seats to witness their famed animal acts. As the crowd settled in for the evening performance, the spotlight was ready to shine on one of nature's most fearsome predators, the lion. Known for their raw power, lions are among the most efficient killers in the animal kingdom. A male African lion can weigh up to 550 pounds with a bite force of 1,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a human skull instantly. Their muscular frames allow them to sprint at speeds of up to 35 miles per hour, and their massive paws are armed with retractable claws capable of disemboweling prey with a single swipe. In the wild, lions are ambush predators, coordinating complex attacks within their pride. But within the circus ring, these same instincts are bent to human will, a delicate balance that, on this fateful night, would shatter. The Bellini name carried particular weight in European circus circles. For 4 generations, they had been synonymous with spectacular lion-taming performances. Their shows alone generated over $2 million yearly, making them one of the most successful family acts in the industry. The pressure of this legacy now rested on the shoulders of 19-year-old James "Jamie" Bellini, the youngest professional lion tamer in modern circus history. Behind the circus glamour lay the harsh reality of animal training. The Bellini method, like many traditional techniques, relied on food deprivation and physical dominance to ensure compliance. Lions were kept hungry before performances, disrupting their natural feeding patterns. Training began at 6 months old, using metal poles, electric prods, and whips to break their wild instincts. Jamie, raised in the circus, learned to read apex predators' body language instead of riding bikes like other children. His father, Marco Bellini, was a legendary lion tamer, revered for commanding even the most aggressive cats. Though Jamie graduated from the Circus Academy just 6 months prior, his hands-on experience with lions was dangerously limited. Family circuses often prioritized tradition over safety. The 3 lions in Jamie's act represented the terrifying power of nature. Caesar and Augustus, both 8-year-old males, had been trained since cubhood using traditional circus methods. Their spirits had been broken through years of systematic dominance training. Daily sessions where food was withheld until commands were perfectly executed, and any sign of aggression was met with physical punishment. The newest addition was Rex, a massive 500-pound male recently acquired from a South African breeder. Unlike the others, Rex had spent his first 4 years in a more natural environment, making him particularly resistant to human control. On that December evening, the big top was filled to capacity, with Marco Bellini sitting in the front row as the spotlights illuminated the sawdust ring. The air carried the metallic scent of fear, not from the audience, but from 19-year-old Jamie Bellini about to enter the cage. The lions could sense it too, their evolutionary instinct honed to detect the fear of potential prey. As Jamie stepped into the ring in a sequined costume, a replica of his father's, his traditional tools, a steel core training stick, and a backup whip seemed woefully inadequate against the combined 1,500 pounds of predator before him. In the holding cage, Rex's pupils dilated, his tail swishing ominously, signs of agitation that the handlers overlooked as routine. Lion training relies heavily on feeding schedules. Performers typically enter the ring approximately 4 hours after the cat's last meal, enough time for them to be hungry and motivated but not desperately so. That evening, due to a scheduled change, the lions hadn't been fed for nearly 6 hours. This seemingly small deviation from routine would prove fatal. The first part of the act began with basic commands. Caesar and Augustus performed their rehearsed movements, though their behavior showed subtle signs of defiance. Their responses were delayed by seconds, their movements stiff rather than fluid, indicators that the social hierarchy within the cage was shifting. In the wild, lions established dominance through unwavering confidence and physical presence. Jamie's nervous energy was broadcasting weakness to 3 predators programmed by evolution to exploit exactly that. When Rex entered the ring, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Unlike circus-bred lions, wild-born cats retain stronger hunting instincts. His eyes never left Jamie, but not in submission. He was displaying classic stalking behavior. Lions in the wild often maintain direct eye contact with their prey while positioning themselves for an attack. Jamie raised his training stick, his voice carrying a slight tremor as he commanded Rex to sit. The lion's ears flattened against his skull, a warning sign that went unheeded. In that crucial moment, Jamie made a fatal mistake. He broke eye contact, glancing briefly at his father in the audience. In the wild, this would signal submission to a lion. In the circus ring, it was an invitation to attack. Rex's attack came with explosive speed. The 500-pound mass of muscle slammed into Jamie's chest with the force of a small car. The training stick shattered, its steel core proving worthless against the immense power of the animal. The sound of Jamie's bones cracking echoed through the tent as Rex's jaws clamped around his shoulder. A lion's canine teeth can penetrate up to 2.5 inches deep into flesh, and their jaw strength is sufficient to crush the femur of a wildebeest. Jamie's collarbone shattered instantly under this devastating bite force. Caesar and Augusta, their own predatory instincts triggered by the scent of blood and the sound of struggle, joined the attack. While Rex maintained his grip on the upper body, Caesar attacked the legs, his powerful jaws crushing Jamie's right femur. Augustus, displaying typical pride hunting behavior, went for the throat, a natural killing technique lions use to suffocate their prey. The audience's screams mixed with the wet sounds of tearing flesh as the lions dragged Jamie across the sawdust. His sequined costume, designed to catch the spotlight, now gleamed with spreading crimson stains. The cats displayed a behavior known as kill frenzy, a state where predators become overwhelmed by their hunting instincts, often fighting among themselves over their prey while it's still alive. Marco, restrained by security personnel, watched helplessly from mere feet away. Circus protocol dictated that no one enter the ring during an attack. Introducing more humans would only escalate the predatory response. The handlers attempted to use fire extinguishers, a standard emergency response based on lions' natural fear of loud noises and unusual sensations. However, once in a kill frenzy, even these deterrents proved ineffective. The attack lasted just under 3 minutes, an eternity in which the full devastating power of 3 adult male lions was unleashed. When handlers finally managed to drive the cats back using a combination of fire extinguishers, electric prods, and metal poles, the damage was catastrophic. The human body contains approximately 1.5 gallons of blood. Jamie had lost nearly an entire gallon in those few minutes. Despite the immediate response of emergency services and being rushed to Opsdale San Camilo, Jamie was pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m. The medical examiner's report detailed the extent of the injuries: 126 distinct wounds across his body, including compound fractures to both femurs, 12 broken ribs, and a completely crushed larynx. His left shoulder had been nearly separated from his body, with tissue damage extending down to the bone. Rex's initial bite had generated enough force, approximately 1,000 psi, to splinter his scapula into 8 pieces. The fatal wound came from Augustus, whose powerful jaws had crushed Jamie's trachea and severed both carotid arteries, a killing technique perfected through millions of years of evolution. The 3 lions were initially quarantined for observation. Caesar and Augustus were later relocated to a wildlife sanctuary in South Africa, where they could live out their days in a more fitting environment far from the spotlight. Rex, however, was deemed a risk too great for rehabilitation and was humanely euthanized after further evaluations. The conclusion was clear. Rex's resistance to human control had never been mere tolerance, but a quiet defiance that ultimately led to the deadly eruption of instinct. The attack marked the end of an era for the Bellini legacy, leaving the circus industry to confront the uncomfortable reality of its relationship with the animals that had defied it for so long. On a warm evening in the summer of 1985, the circus tent in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, was alive with energy. Families from the small town and nearby communities gathered under its towering red and white stripes, drawn by the promise of daring performances and unforgettable sights. Inside, the scent of sawdust mingled with the buttery aroma of popcorn, and the electric lights overhead cast a soft glow on the packed rows of benches. Children sat wide-eyed, clutching their snacks as the ringmaster announced the evening's highlight, a breathtaking display of human skill and animal power. At the center of it all was Manuel Jr. Ruffin, a charismatic lion tamer with years of experience. His confidence and charm commanded the crowd's attention as he prepared to enter the cage with 3 majestic lions. Beneath the excitement, however, a quiet tension hung in the air, a reminder of the inherent danger that came with facing such powerful creatures. Ruffin was no ordinary performer. Born Emmanuel Ruffin in Mississippi in 1938, he had joined the Clyde Beatty Railroad Circus at the age of 13, quickly becoming the student of legendary animal trainer Clyde Beatty. Under Beatty's mentorship, Ruffin developed a reputation as a fearless showman, earning the nickname Prince Bogino for his elegant and daring performances. Over the years, he became known for his ability to command lions and tigers with apparent ease, mastering tricks that showcased their innate power while emphasizing his control. Despite the inherent risks of his profession, Ruffin believed his bond with the animals minimized danger, a confidence that set him apart from many of his peers. The act that night was one Ruffin had performed countless times before. He would enter the cage with 3 lions, guiding them through a series of precise movements, leaping over barriers, balancing on stools, and responding to his verbal and physical cues. The performance required perfect timing and unwavering focus, but Ruffin's years of experience made it seem effortless. As he entered the cage, cracking his whip and gesturing confidently, the audience erupted in applause. The lions, massive and powerful, moved deliberately as they took their positions. Their golden coats gleamed under the lights, and their piercing eyes followed Ruffin's every move. The routine began smoothly. One lion leapt gracefully over a low barrier, landing with a thud that reverberated through the tent. Another balanced on a stool, its muscles rippling as it obeyed Ruffin's commands. The third lion paced slightly before settling into position, completing the trio. The crowd watched in awe as Ruffin demonstrated his mastery over the animals, directing them with a combination of sharp commands and precise gestures. For the audience, it was a mesmerizing display of courage and coordination. But as the performance continued, one of the lions began to behave erratically. It hesitated during a cue, its posture shifting into something more rigid. Ruffin cracked his whip, a sharp signal to refocus the animal, but the lion remained tense. Its low growl cut through the noise of the crowd, drawing a murmur of uncertainty from the spectators. Ruffin stepped closer, issuing another command. For a moment, the lion froze, its body coiled with tension. Without warning, the lion pounced. Its massive frame collided with Ruffin, knocking him off his feet. Gasps rippled through the audience as the lion clamped its powerful jaws around Ruffin's leg, dragging him across the floor. Gasps turned to horrified cries as the trainer struggled against the lion's immense strength. The sight of blood spreading across the sawdust shattered the momentary stillness, and panic swept through the tent as the lion's growls grew louder and its movements more aggressive. As Ruffin struggled to free himself, a second lion joined the attack. It leapt on his torso, pinning him to the ground, while swiping at his chest and neck with its claws. The trainer's bright costume was quickly soaked in blood, and his attempts to fend off the animals grew weaker with each passing moment. Panic rippled through the tent. Some parents instinctively shielded their children, clutching them tightly as they backed away from the ring. Others bolted for the exits, their hurried movements adding to the confusion. Those still seated sat frozen, their faces pale and eyes wide, unable to look away from the horrifying scene unfolding before them. Circus workers hurried into the cage, equipped with whatever they could grab to intervene. Their urgent movements focused on breaking the lion's attention. They shouted and struck at the lions, attempting to create enough of a distraction to pull Ruffin to safety. The lions roared in defiance, their primal instincts fully unleashed. After several agonizing minutes, the workers managed to drive the animals back, clearing a path to reach Ruffin. Two handlers dragged him out of the cage, his body limp and covered in deep wounds. Despite the quick response, Ruffin's injuries were catastrophic. The lions had inflicted severe trauma to his leg, chest, and neck, causing massive blood loss. Medical personnel arrived at the scene and worked desperately to stabilize him, but their efforts were in vain. Ruffin succumbed to his injuries shortly after the attack, leaving the circus tent eerily quiet in the wake of the tragedy. Ruffin's death shocked the circus world, where he was both admired and respected for his skill and showmanship. Trainers who knew him spoke of his dedication and the unique connection he shared with the animals he worked with. Yet, the incident highlighted the unpredictable nature of wild animals, regardless of the bond a trainer believed they had built. The lions, despite years of captivity and training, remained powerful predators, capable of reverting to their instincts in an instant. While the lions involved in the attack were spared euthanasia, their futures remained uncertain. The circus industry itself began to feel the weight of increased scrutiny following Ruffin's death. Trainers revisited their safety protocols, and some questioned whether performances with large predators could ever truly be made safe. The tragedy added fuel to ongoing debates about the ethical implications of using wild animals in entertainment, though for many it was a risk inseparable from the spectacle of the circus. Manuel Jr. Ruffin's legacy was cemented not only by his talent but also by the profound impact of his untimely death. Posthumously, he was honored for his contributions to the circus arts, including his 2010 induction into Sarasota's Circus Ring of Fame as the first African-American performer to receive the accolade. While his career was tragically cut short, his life remains an example of the artistry and danger of the circus world. In October 2018, the small town of Olonets in Russia's Republic of Karelia became the unlikely setting for a nightmare. Known for its picturesque landscapes and quiet streets, Olonets had never been a place for grand spectacles. But on this particular evening, a traveling circus had arrived, bringing with it the allure of wild animals and daring performances. The Anschlag Circus, a modest troupe from Voronezh, had set up their tent near the town center, promising an evening of family entertainment. What began as an innocent night out for hundreds of locals soon unraveled into chaos, leaving both the audience and performers scarred by what transpired. The tent was crowded that night, its rows of wooden benches filled with families eager for entertainment. Overhead, bright lights cast a glow over the sawdust ring, illuminating the eager faces of children leaning forward in anticipation. Parents chatted and smiled, unaware of the chaos that would soon unfold. Among the evening's star performers was Yashka, a 16-year-old bear who had spent years as the centerpiece of the Anschlag Circus. Known for his size and strength, Yashka had been trained to perform stunts that both amazed and amused. When the bear made his entrance, towering on his hind legs and balancing a small wheelbarrow in his paws, the crowd erupted in applause. Guided by the sharp commands of his handler, Ruslan Solodyuk, Yashka drew delighted cheers, the sight of the hulking creature walking upright both comical and awe-inspiring. Dressed in a bright orange vest for visibility, Solodyuk stayed close to Yashka, offering verbal cues and occasional taps to ensure the bear followed the routine. The act, called Clubfoot and the Garden Wheelbarrow, was a staple of the circus. It involved Yashka pushing the wheelbarrow around the ring, performing small tricks to the delight of the crowd. The bear, despite his size and strength, had been trained to move with surprising precision. His lumbering gait added to the charm of the performance. But as the act continued, Yashka's demeanor began to shift. He slowed, his movements becoming stiff and deliberate. Halfway through the routine, he stopped abruptly, dropping to all fours. Solodyuk hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, barking commands and gesturing for the bear to continue. The audience fell silent, sensing that something was off. Yashka remained motionless, his ears twitching slightly as his body tensed. Yashka suddenly dropped the wheelbarrow and halted in the center of the ring, his massive frame lowering to all fours. For a brief moment, the audience remained quiet, unsure if the pause was part of the act. Then, in a startling move, Yashka leapt at Solodyuk, knocking him off balance. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Solodyuk's shoulder, and screams erupted from the crowd as the handler struggled to free himself. Blood began to soak through Solodyuk's orange vest as Yashka bit into his arm and torso, shaking him violently. The audience's confusion turned to panic as parents grabbed their children and fled toward the exits, while circus workers rushed to intervene. Yashka continued the attack, his powerful claws raking across Solodyuk's chest and arms, tearing through his bright vest. The audience's screams mixed with the shouts of circus workers who rushed into the ring desperate to intervene. One worker, armed with a metal rod, struck Yashka repeatedly in an attempt to free Solodyuk. The bear released his grip momentarily but remained visibly agitated, pacing the ring with short, erratic movements. The absence of barriers separating the audience from the performance area became glaringly apparent as the bear turned his gaze toward the panicked crowd. Parents shielded their children, some frozen in terror, as the hulking animal prowled the ring. Minutes passed as the staff struggled to regain control. Yashka, growling and pacing, refused to back down. A second worker entered the ring with an electric shock device, using it to subdue the bear. The sharp crackle of the device and Yashka's startled roar signaled the end of the chaos. The bear retreated, allowing the staff to pull Solodyuk from the ring. His body was a bloodied mess, his clothes shredded and deep wounds exposed across his torso and arms. Solodyuk was rushed to a nearby hospital where doctors worked to stabilize him. His injuries were severe, deep puncture wounds to his shoulder and arm, along with extensive lacerations on his chest, but he survived. Witnesses later described his survival as miraculous, given the ferocity of the attack and the sheer power of the bear. Solodyuk himself declined to speak publicly about the incident, his silence leaving many to speculate about the moments leading up to the attack. Yashka's fate, however, was sealed. The bear was euthanized shortly after the incident, a decision that sparked outrage among animal rights activists. Many argued that Yashka's aggression was not an isolated act of violence, but a predictable response to years of confinement, harsh training, and relentless stress. To them, the bear was not inherently dangerous, but a victim of exploitation, forced into a life that suppressed his natural instincts and subjected him to constant strain. The story of Yashka and the Olenets attack quickly spread beyond the small town, amplified by the video footage captured by audience members. The chilling clips showed the moment Yashka turned on his handler, the screams of the crowd, and the frantic efforts of the circus staff to subdue the bear. The videos reignited debates in Russia over the use of wild animals in circuses, with critics pointing to the inherent risks for both humans and animals. Despite the outrage, the Anschlag Circus defended its practices, blaming the attack on audience members who had ignored requests not to use flash photography. Others suggested that Yashka's advanced age and joint pain may have contributed to his uncharacteristic behavior. Regardless of the cause, the incident became a grim reminder of the unpredictable nature of wild animals, even those subjected to years of training. The Circo Magnifico Rojas had been a fixture in Argentina's entertainment landscape for over 50 years. Founded by the patriarch of the Rojas family in the 1970s, it had passed to his sons Alejandro and Diego, who had transformed it into one of the most profitable traveling shows in South America. Their main attraction, the one that drew crowds from miles away, was Mara, a massive Asian elephant who had been with the circus for nearly 30 years. At 47 years old, Mara was well past her prime. Her once gray skin had faded to a dull ashen color, marked with scars from decades of training. Her eyes, once bright and alert, had grown dull and listless over the years. Where wild elephants her age would still be active matriarchs leading their herds, Mara spent 23 hours a day chained by one leg to a metal stake, only freed for her twice-daily performances. The Rojas brothers had built their fortune on her back, literally. Each night, she would balance on small pedestals, carry sequin-clad performers on her back, and perform unnatural tricks that delighted audiences unaware the methods used to force her compliance. Behind the colorful curtains, the brothers ruled with iron fists and sharp bullhooks, instruments designed to cause pain and fear in equal measure. On the night of March 17, 2011, the Circo Magnifico was preparing to move from Buenos Aires to Cordoba. Dark clouds had been gathering all afternoon, and by evening, the first rumbles of thunder echoed across the sky. The final performance had ended early due to the approaching storm, and the crew worked frantically to dismantle the tent and load equipment before the downpour began. Alejandro Rojas, the elder brother at 58, supervised the operation with his characteristic impatience. His weathered face, creased from years of sun exposure and perpetual frowning, grew increasingly tense as the wind picked up. Diego, 3 years younger but looking much older due to decades of hard drinking, was tasked with preparing Mara for transport. The elephant transport cage, a rusting metal container barely large enough for Mara to stand in, waited by the loading ramp. It was a contraption she had entered thousands of times before, but tonight something was different. Perhaps it was the electricity in the air from the approaching storm, or perhaps it was something deeper, a culmination of decades of suffering reaching a breaking point. As the first heavy raindrops began to fall, Diego approached Mara with the chain that would lead her to the transport cage. The elephant stood motionless, her massive form silhouetted against the darkening sky. When Diego tugged on her restraints, Mara remained still, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the circus grounds. The rain intensified, quickly transforming the packed dirt of the circus grounds into a muddy quagmire. Workers slipped and cursed as they struggled with equipment. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark, momentary brightness, followed by the deep rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very earth. Alejandro, seeing his brother's difficulty with Mara, stormed across the grounds, mud splashing with each angry step. Water streamed down his face as he shouted at Diego for his incompetence. Taking the bullhook from his brother's hands, Alejandro approached Mara with the confidence of a man who had bent animals to his will for decades. The bullhook gleamed dully in the rain as Alejandro raised it. With practiced precision, he brought it down on Mara's hind leg, the sharp metal tip digging into a spot already marked by countless similar strikes. In previous years, this would have been enough to make the elephant move immediately. But something had changed in Mara. Perhaps it was the storm awakening something primal within her. Or perhaps it was simply that after 30 years of abuse, something fundamental had finally broken. As the pain of the bullhook registered, Mara's body tensed not in submission, but in rage. The change was subtle at first, a shifting of weight, a lowering of her massive head. Alejandro, focused on forcing compliance, failed to notice the warning signs that any experienced handler would have recognized. When Mara's trunk began to rise, he was still shouting commands, still believing in his absolute control. The first strike came with shocking speed. Mara's trunk, capable of lifting logs weighing hundreds of pounds, swung in a powerful arc that caught Diego squarely in the chest. The force sent him flying backward through the air until his body collided with the metal transport cage with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground, motionless in the mud. Alejandro froze, his mind unable to process the sudden reversal of power. For a moment, man and beast locked eyes. The man, seeing for the first time not a trained performer but a wild animal awakened to its own strength. The elephant seeing not a master but merely an obstacle to freedom. When Mara moved toward him, Alejandro finally reacted, turning to run. But the mud betrayed him, causing his feet to slip from under him. He fell face first into the muck, the bullhook flying from his grasp. As he struggled to rise, he felt Mara's trunk wrap around his waist with irresistible strength. The sensation of being lifted was momentarily weightless, almost peaceful. Then came the terrible realization of what was happening as he rose higher into the rain-filled air. Workers scattered in terror, their shouts drowned by the storm and Mara's trumpeting roar, a sound not heard from her in decades. With a powerful swing, Mara slammed Alejandro into the ground. The impact drove the air from his lungs and shattered bones throughout his body. But Mara wasn't finished. With methodical precision, she lifted him again and brought him down a second time, then a third. By the fourth impact, Alejandro Rojas had ceased to exist as anything recognizable as human. Lightning split the sky as Mara turned away from the broken form of her tormentor. Rain streamed down her massive body, washing away decades of circus dust and human control. For the first time since her capture as a young elephant, Mara moved with purpose, not dictated by human commands. The remaining workers watched in horror as the elephant approached the perimeter fence. With a deliberate push of her massive forehead, she tested the barrier. The fence, designed to keep people out rather than elephants in, groaned under the pressure. A second push bent the metal posts. The third broke them entirely. As Mara stepped through the gap she had created, a strange calm seemed to descend. The storm continued to rage, but there was something almost peaceful in the sight of the massive creature walking away from her prison, each step taking her further from a life of captivity. No one attempted to follow her into the storm. Those who had witnessed the fate of the Rojas brothers had no desire to share it. By morning, when authorities arrived, they found a circus in ruins, equipment scattered by the storm, a transport cage stained with blood, and the broken bodies of the once feared brothers. The search for Mara continued for weeks. Helicopters scanned the countryside and tracking dogs followed her scent until it disappeared near a river 23 miles from the circus grounds. Experts were baffled by how a 4-ton elephant could simply vanish, especially one with no experience of living in the wild. Some claimed to have spotted her in remote areas, while others insisted she must have died from exposure or starvation. Conspiracy theories emerged about animal rights activists having orchestrated her escape and hidden her at a sanctuary, but no concrete evidence of Mara's fate ever surfaced. The Circo Magnifico Rojas never recovered from that night. With its owners dead and its star attraction gone, the remaining performers and crew scattered to other shows. The equipment was sold at auction, the animals distributed to other circuses, or in some cases, to sanctuaries. The tragedy prompted renewed scrutiny of animal circuses throughout Argentina. Journalists investigated the conditions in which performing animals were kept, revealing widespread abuse and neglect. Within 2 years, legislation was passed banning the use of wild animals in circuses nationwide. For those who had witnessed Mara's final act of defiance, the memory never faded. They spoke of it in hushed tones, how the storm had seemed to fuel her rage, how her eyes had changed from dull resignation to fierce determination, how the rain had washed away the gaudy paint from her skin as she walked away from 3 decades of captivity. Some said it was justice, others called it a tragedy that could have been avoided. But all agreed on one thing: on that stormy night in Buenos Aires, they had witnessed not just the death of 2 men, but the rebirth of a wild spirit long suppressed. A reminder that nature, when pushed too far, will eventually push back with devastating force. The morning of June 13, 2015 in Buchen, Germany was serene. The small town was waking slowly as sunlight filtered through the dense forest surrounding its quiet streets. It was the kind of morning that invited reflection and tranquility. But hidden in the shadows of the forest, an enormous figure moved silently, setting the stage for a tragedy that would haunt the town forever. 65-year-old Maximilian began his day as he had done every morning since retiring from the local power station a year earlier. A dedicated engineer during his career, he was known for his meticulousness and his calm, steady demeanor. Retirement hadn't dulled his sense of purpose. He'd made it his routine to walk the wooded trails behind his house, often carrying a trash bag to collect litter along the way. He loved keeping the paths clean, a habit that endeared him to neighbors who frequently saw him on his walks. Maximilian wasn't just admired for his tidiness, he was a friendly face, always willing to stop for a chat with fellow walkers. The circus had come to Buchin just a few days earlier, and its brightly colored tents had become the talk of the town. Circus Luna, a small traveling show, brought with it a variety of attractions, but its star performer was a 34-year-old African elephant named Baby. Standing over 10 feet tall and weighing 7,000 pounds, Baby was a central figure in the circus's acts, captivating audiences with her size and grace. She had been with the circus her entire life, performing tricks and parading under the lights of the big top. Yet Baby's history wasn't without controversy. In 2012, she had struck a young boy with her trunk, breaking his jaw, a dangerous sign of the power she carried beneath her highly trained behavior. The night before, Circus Luna had performed its usual show, with Baby as the star of the finale. After the performance, her handlers led her back to her enclosure, secured the gate, and left for the night. What they didn't know was that someone would interfere. Investigators would later find footprints near the enclosure, suggesting that an unidentified person had tampered with the gate, leaving it open just enough for the elephant to wander free. As Maximilian walked that morning, Baby had already left the circus grounds. She had wandered into the forest near the outskirts of Buchin. The towering trees concealed her massive form as she moved cautiously, her large ears shifting to detect sounds around her. Maximilian rounded a bend on the trail and suddenly came face to face with the enormous animal. Baby, her towering form framed by the dense forest, froze mid-step. Her massive ears flared out as her trunk swung low. The silence of the moment filled with tension. For a moment, both man and elephant stood still, the calm of the morning shattered by the unexpected encounter. Then Baby let out a piercing trumpet, the sound blasting through the trees like a siren. Startled by the noise and overwhelmed by the unfamiliar environment, the massive elephant reared up onto her hind legs. Her front feet came crashing down with such force that the ground quaked, sending a shock wave through the forest floor. The vibration knocked Maximilian off balance, and he fell forward onto his hands and knees, his trash bag tumbling to the ground beside him. Baby's panic escalated. Her trunk lashed out, brushing against branches and sending leaves scattering. The towering creature surged forward, her powerful legs propelling her toward Maximilian in a blind charge. In an instant, one of her massive feet came down on his back. The crushing force of her weight shattered his spine and ribs instantly. The impact pressed his body into the forest floor, leaving him motionless. The attack ended as suddenly as it had begun. Baby, now disoriented and agitated, backed away from the lifeless figure and disappeared deeper into the woods. The only sounds that remained were the faint rustling of leaves and the distant echo of her trumpet. Maximilian's life had been extinguished in a single moment of overwhelming accidental violence, a collision of human routine and animal instinct. Back at the circus, the staff discovered Baby's empty enclosure during their morning rounds. Realizing the gate had been left open, they immediately raised the alarm, contacting local authorities and launching a search for the missing elephant. Meanwhile, Baby retreated deeper into the woods, her enormous body concealed among the trees. She was found hours later by her handler, who approached her cautiously. Speaking softly, he coaxed her out of the forest and back into the circus grounds. It wasn't long before Maximilian's body was discovered on the forest trail. The quiet man who had spent his mornings caring for the forest trails was gone, his life cut short in an encounter that no one could have anticipated. The discovery led to questions about the events that allowed such an unusual and tragic encounter to unfold in the peaceful town. The investigation revealed clear signs of human interference with the gate to Baby's enclosure, but whoever had set her loose vanished without a trace. It seemed possible that the individual believed they were liberating the animals, acting out of a misguided sense of justice or compassion for a creature they saw as a trapped performer. Yet the person's actions, whether fueled by naivete or recklessness, brought tragedy instead of freedom. In the aftermath, Baby was moved to Safari Park Stukenbrock, a facility better equipped to house her alongside other elephants. The relocation wasn't just about logistics, it was a reset for the towering performer, a chance to trade the bright lights of the circus for the quieter rhythms of a spacious new home. There, Baby lived out her days in a controlled environment, no longer part of a performance, but still a commanding presence in her new domain. Thanks for watching this deep dive into the most horrific circus animal attacks ever recorded. If you're not done exploring yet, there's another powerful story waiting for you on the end screen. Click to keep watching. Hope to see you there.